I believe there's a hero in all of us.
Hello friends, my name is Stevie Kane and welcome to Film Trigger. Thank you for joining me as I continue my review series for all the Spider-Man movies because I saw No Way Home and I really wanted to rewatch all the older films through the lens of knowing that they are now in the MCU. It might change my opinions about the ones I didn't like and it might change my opinions about the ones that I really did like. Prime example, my 2002 Spider-Man review. That movie, it just was a lot more fun knowing the future of that Spider-Man in the MCU. So far, I'm having a lot of fun with this different aspect of these movies that I've seen before. Before we dive into the actual review, if you could head down to the thumbs up like button, the subscribe, and the little bell ding thing, and tell it to mind its own business. Alright, without further ado, let's dive into my review for Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2, the movie a lot of people claim is one of the best comic book movie adaptations ever made. I'm not so sure I agree with them. I don't think I've ever really agreed with them on that. But before we dive into all of that, let's jump into the things that I like about this film. Peter Parker's story. This story is just very well told. He's got a very unbalanced life. He's juggling school, work, family, friends, and of course, what's taking up most of his time, Spider-Man. Is there enough time for Spider-Man? Is there enough time for Peter Parker with Spider-Man? That's what we're brought to with Peter Parker in this movie.
I want a life of my own. I'm Spider-Man. No more.
And it's affecting him so much, he's starting to lose his powers. He's losing his confidence in himself, which is an oddity. I get the psychology of what they're trying to play off here. I think it does work for this movie because it's not just his powers he's losing. He's also losing like his mojo with Mary Jane. She just doesn't see the same thing in Peter Parker anymore because he's not the same thing. He's in the middle of something that she doesn't understand and he won't let her in on. This is part of that responsibility thing that Ben was talking about in the previous movie. Peter hasn't quite figured it out yet. He thought responsibility was to separate his lives completely. That's the responsible thing to do. But he's learning, maybe not so much. And speaking of Uncle Ben, when Peter Parker opens up to Aunt May the truth about Uncle Ben, that he feels responsible for his death, that was a huge barrier that had to be broken down for Peter Parker to realize that he can't keep these two worlds separate. But it's that hard conversation that he's been ignoring for years, 2 years to be exact. It just adds on to the pile of crap that is building on top of his shoulders that is making his world completely unbalanced. So Peter Parker's story is a very well hashed out story in this film. And it's doing it all while Dr. Octavius' story is playing out as well. Which brings me to Alfred Molina. Alfred Molina is... what a gem. The guy is just really fun to watch on screen. He's got this duality with him. It's like a more subdued version of the Green Goblin. Green Goblin was really freaking on edge. Alfred Molina brings this sort of subdued nuance with Doc Ock. You can tell he really wants the best, but like something's controlling him. You know, the little arm things. Which brings me to his costume design.
Crazy scientist turns himself into some kind of a monster. 4 mechanical arms welded right onto his body.
This was a great freaking costume. Way better than that Green Goblin piece of shit that was in the past movie that looked like it came from a cosplay store. The CGI and the practical effects of the arms are actually very well done. Very good balance between practical and CGI, which a lot of movies, especially these days, have a hard time figuring out the right balance. They always just use CGI for everything. And the way his story arc goes from him being this really nice, sweet guy to this mind-controlled villain back to the guy like going, oh shit, I fucked up. He's got a great story arc as well. Very well told, very hashed out. I'm very aware of what's going on in his head throughout the entire film, which makes me relate to the character, whether I agree with what he's doing or not. Now, there are some aspects to Doc Ock that I'm on the fence about and some things I don't like, but we'll talk more about those when we get to that part of the review. But one of my favorite scenes with Doc Ock is when he escapes from the hospital. And that's not just because it's a cool looking scene, it's the first scene that we get where he's showing what he can actually do with the arms, how they're controlling him more than he's controlling them, but it's the use of the score, or lack thereof, because there's no music during that scene. And I think that really plays into the intensity of what's going on here, and also plays into Sam Raimi's horror roots. because that scene, and amongst a few others, have a very horror vibe to them. So I'm glad to see Sam Raimi sneak those in. I didn't catch them in the last film. Let me know if there were some in the first movie that I didn't catch in the comments below. But I'm pretty sure that this one has more of a quote-unquote soft horror element, and I really enjoyed that. The fight scenes between Doc Ock and Spidey are they're very well done. They're grand, they're epic, they're creatively choreographed, and just all around entertaining. It's all playing out in a large-scale arena with big consequences. And that's what makes for a great action scene. And the CGI during these parts are pretty on point. We'll dive a little bit more into that here in just a little bit, because there are certain aspects that weren't great, but for the most part, the CGI, especially for the close-up scenes, were pretty well done. One action scene in particular is when Spidey stops the train. This is a very impactful scene. He goes all in and he's willing to die to save these people on this train. And then these passengers realize what he's done, what he's sacrificed, and that he's just a freaking kid who did it. A kid just trying to do the right thing. This humanizes Spider-Man to these people. They no longer look at him as this invincible superhero. They understand that he's vulnerable, and that makes this a very special scene. Another very special scene that I really enjoyed in this movie was when Mary Jane learned that Spider-Man and Peter Parker are the same person. Mostly because it was just like, thank God, because that was like the dead goose hanging over both their heads that was not letting them connect the way they needed to connect. So when it finally happens, you're like, thank God. But mostly it was impactful and it was earned. We wanted that to happen, and they gave it to us right at the end of the movie, right when they should have given it to us. They built up to that. It was a very, as I said, earned moment, and I respect it for that. But leading up to that moment brings me to a few things that I'm on the fence about when it comes to this movie. The overall dynamic between Peter Parker and Mary Jane is odd. They don't act like friends where one grew feelings for another and got shot down. No. They act like they had actually been in a relationship previously, and now they're just kind of like bitchy with each other. More so Mary Jane than Peter Parker, but Peter Parker seems like he's like leading her on by a string here, which he kind of is. He's kind of doing that, but that makes us back and forth between them. Oh, I love you. No, I love you. I want to be with you. No, I want to be with you, but I don't want to be with you, but I want to be with him. It just gets really exhausting, which is why I think when she finally learned that Peter Parker and Spider-Man were the same person, we're like, thank God. Because leading up to that was just tiring to watch. Like, it was like, okay, just tell her you love her, man. Jesus. Damn it, Peter. But Peter acts like MJ's going to wait around for him forever. And that's not fair of him to do. And it seems a little out of character for him, like considering the fact that he told her to, thanks, but no thanks. When he has the opportunity to tell her, he just backs off. And it's like, okay, here we go. This is going to keep going. As I said, it was exhausting to watch. And that's why I'm on the fence when it comes to their dynamic. MJ saying that she thinks she kind of knew all along that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. No, you didn't. No, you didn't, MJ. Nothing in this movie says you thought that, except for that one little scene in the cafe where you asked Peter to kiss you. But you also did the same thing with your fiance. That tells me that you know Spidey is somebody that you just don't know who it is. So you're just going around kissing people until you figure it out. It just happened to be Peter Parker. The separation between Spidey and Peter, I think this could have been explored a little bit better or a little bit more in depth. They do present it pretty well in the fact that he's got this inner conflict and that's affecting his powers from working, and he thinks he needs to get rid of Spider-Man. That's the only way to live a normal life. He's missing the cue. He's missing the mark. He's already separated them, and he thinks to fix a problem, he needs to separate them even more. And that's not the case. The whole key is for him to learn how to live this life together as one life, as opposed to keeping them separate. But the way this movie presents it is more of his love with Mary Jane is what brings this duality together. And it's not the case. It's actually him balancing his life with his Aunt May, his work, his school. Once he fixes all of that stuff, along with the Mary Jane thing, that's what recalibrates him and brings balance to his life. But they didn't really play into that aspect of it too much. They more played into the Mary Jane part of it, which I get, the love story thing, but I just wish they would have dove deeper into all aspects of his life as opposed to just hinting at that, but really focusing on Mary Jane. And while we're talking about Peter Parker and Spider-Man, Why is nobody questioning Peter's relationship with Spider-Man? Why? It makes no sense. He just casually talks about, oh yeah, me and Spidey, we go way back. I take pictures of him for the Bugle. No, I'm not Spider-Man. Don't ask that. Don't worry, Peter. Nobody's going to ask that. Nobody does ask you. No one even fucking questions if you're Spider-Man or not. Little too much suspension of disbelief for me. Peter Parker's nerdy persona just isn't that good of a disguise. I know it's a movie, but this is my job to pick these little things apart. These are the things that I think about when I watch these movies. And you completely disagree with what I'm saying? Well then, let me know in the comments or subscribe to somebody else's channel. Shit. Moving right along with things that I do not like about this movie. James Franco. You're somehow worse in this movie than you were in the previous movie. And trust me, you were pretty shitty in the last movie. You just standing there saying nothing just looks like bad acting. And I'm not trying to harp on this to be funny or go on a fake rant or anything like this. I genuinely hate every moment James Franco is on screen. I can't fathom why they kept him in this movie after the shit show that the first movie was. Sam Raimi has to be like the nicest guy in the world. That's the only thing I can imagine. Sam Raimi's just back here just going, it's gonna be fine. It'll be fine once we go through editing. We'll just edit that out. We'll choose the best take. There is no best take with James Franco. He's either standing there silently, acting terribly, or he's very violently loud, also acting terribly. Nothing good has come from his performance thus far in this series for me. Crap. Now, remember I did say something about the CGI earlier? Okay, so the CGI, for the most part, was pretty good. There's only one real aspect that I have a bone to pick with, and that's when you get the CGI people, like when Spider-Man's swinging through the city or Doc Ock's carrying Mary Jane, they look super rubbery, like even more rubbery than the first movie. And I can't quite pinpoint if the CGI is lower quality or if there's just more of it, so I'm noticing. But either way, every time I saw one of these CGI adaptations of these characters, it was just painfully noticeable. Doc Ock lacks sense of urgency when fighting Peter Parker. From the moment Harry Osborn said, find Peter Parker, he'll get you Spider-Man, and then I'll get you your tritium, to the moment he found Peter Parker was like a day. Or if not a full day, then many hours later. He has his name. He knows who Peter Parker is. He can easily find his address, where he works, Aunt May's address, and go locate him there. But is that what he does? No. What does he do? Well, he just roams around the city being very quiet, because we don't hear from him for a very long time, until he shows up in the coffee shop, which is another thing I have a problem with. So, Doc Ock, question for you. What was your plan after throwing the car into the coffee shop? When you would obviously kill a normal human being, were you going to ask dead Peter Parker to help you locate Spider-Man? Great action sequence. Really was. Made no sense of why he would potentially murder this kid. The only person that he knows would know the identity of Spider-Man or lead him to Spider-Man.
Find Spider-Man, or I'll peel the flesh off her bones.
The last thing that's on my what I don't like list about this movie is the dialogue. There's a lot of really good acting with a lot of really bad dialogue going on here. Prime example, when Doc Ock has Mary Jane in the collapsed building in the river and she's pleading with him to let her go, he looks at her and says, I can't let you go, you'll bring the police. Not that they can stop me now that Spider-Man's dead. Okay, then let her go. What's it fucking matter if you keep her or not? Oh, that's right, because we can't have our climactic ending without Mary Jane. Okay, now I get it. See, it's just poor dialogue just to get us into the next scene. That sentence kind of makes sense, so let's use it and move forward. But there's a lot of this sort of dialogue that takes Alfred Molina's performance and just brings it down a peg. Not really his performance, but the words spewing out of his mouth just don't match up with the awesome acting that I'm watching here. Speaking of Doc Ock, one thing that I also did not like about his character was his lack of acknowledgement about his wife being dead because of him. I thought they were leading up to that being a pivotal part of his story, him realizing that he killed his wife, and maybe, a lot of his anger could have been him blaming Spider-Man or blaming Osborn or whatever. But no, he just never talks about it. Ever. His loving wife. They made a point to show us how much he loves his wife, and it never plays out again in the movie. I just could not figure out why. That would have been a great thing to add into his redemption to that, but it just never happens. It never gets brought up again. His wife dies, and now he just wants more tritium. With that being said, I do have 2 petty points here. Number 1, there's way too many horror movie damsel in distress screams. Like, a lot. There's every fucking scene. Some chick is screaming bloody murder, and it drives me nuts. And my other petty point is Peter Parker saved another kid from another burning building. Okay, let's be more creative here, guys. But I did notice when he saved the kid and fell through the floor, he didn't take the kid and like gently lift him up back onto the ledge. He threw him like a sack of potatoes over the ledge. Trust me, it's kind of humorous how he just throws the kid into the flames. Overall, this was a pretty decent movie with a lot of really good bits and pieces in it. Character development for Spidey and Doc Ock I thought were stellar, and the action scenes were spectacular. But watching this movie, I had a hard time keeping my interest in it as much as I did in the first film. The on-again, off-again MJ, Peter Parker storyline I found to be exhausting. And James Franco's acting stain all over this movie is what brings me to giving this movie a C.
Well, it was pretty good.
Well, it wasn't bad.
Well, there were parts of it that weren't very good, though.
It could have been a lot better.
There you have it, guys. My review for Spider-Man 2. I gave it a C. I know a lot of people love this movie, but come on, you gotta admit, I had some points, right? Yeah? No? Agreed? Disagree? Let me know in the comments below. Also, be sure to check out some more of my videos. And as always, stay trigger happy, my friends. Peace.
Where you been, pal? You don't return my calls.
I've been kind of busy.
Taking pictures of your friend, Spider-Man.